At the very edge of a small town that looked like many others stood a small house. From the outside, it didn't look very rich, but it was very neat and tidy. It consisted of just a couple of rooms, a veranda, and a kitchen. There was also a small, very well-kept plot of land and a little shed for various tools and inventory. And that was all that had fallen to Emma as an inheritance from her mother. A few years earlier, the woman had raised her daughter alone, refusing to answer any questions about the girl's father. When she discovered she had a serious illness, it was already too late to help. Everything had become neglected. She died right there in the hospital, literally burning up in a week. Since then, Emma had lived alone, even though all her former classmates already had families, and many had more than one child. She wasn't a recluse or withdrawn person and had even met some young men a few times, but it always quickly turned into a fleeting romance and her gentleman callers disappeared. Colleagues at work and acquaintances whispered behind her back, calling her a loser, unable to start a family. She was almost ready to give up on her personal life, but soon abandoned that idea. On that day, the weather was very cold and dreary, and it had been a difficult day at work. As soon as Emma got on the bus that took her home from work every day, she immediately fell asleep on one of the seats. Fortunately that day, a neighbor who lived a couple of houses down was also returning from her daughter's and managed to wake the girl up. Otherwise, Emma would definitely have ridden all the way around the bus route, from where it would have already been impossible to get out at that time. Thanking the woman, Emma hurried home, bundled up tightly in her scarf. The road passed through a small grove, and right at the entrance, she saw a tall, very poorly dressed young man. He smiled at her apologetically, as if embarrassed by his appearance, and started laying down on one of the benches, clearly intending to spend the night there. Emma managed to get a good look at the guy. His jacket was completely unsuitable for the season, and he was trying hard to tuck his freezing hands into it. His jeans were torn and very worn, looking a little too short for him. His footwear looked even worse. The sneakers were practically falling apart, and one was even tied together with string to prevent the sole from coming off completely. The guy curled up into a ball to bed down for the night. For the rest of the way home, Emma could think of nothing but this poor fellow. She couldn't imagine how he would be able to survive until morning in such cold weather. The whole way, the girl imagined terrible scenes of the young man dying in the park. When she finally came to her senses, she started looking for something warm to give the stranger, but since there were no men's clothes in the house, she only found a pair of gloves that were on the larger side and a warm scarf that her mother had knit. Without even having a proper breakfast, she grabbed the bag of clothes and hurried to the grove. But the bench where the stranger had stayed the night before was empty. Emma decided that maybe the poor guy had gone towards the residential buildings a couple of streets over to warm up in the entryways. At least she very much wanted to believe that he was somewhere warm now and that they would definitely meet again. Emma had always stood out for being responsive. Even at work they called her a saving wand because she was ready to understand everyone. And if someone needed her to budge over or help with something, they immediately ran to her. And so now, too, her kindness of spirit gave her no peace. Emma couldn't wait for the workday to end in the hope of meeting that guy again. She was restless all day long, waiting for evening impatiently. As soon as her shift ended, Emma hurried to the familiar grove, rushing as if to a date. She couldn't understand why she wanted so badly to help yesterday's poor soul. Just thinking about him made her heart ready to jump out of her chest. She was lucky. The guy was sitting on that very same bench. When he saw Emma, he smiled awkwardly, as if embarrassed by his appearance, and immediately cast his eyes down, but that was enough for the girl to realize that there was something about him that made her heart beat even faster and a shudder run through her body. "Here, please take this," she said, holding out the bag to him. "It's gloves and a scarf. It'll be warmer. That's all I can do to help." The guy raised his eyes to her, and for a moment she saw some kind of affectionate sparks flash through them. When he spoke, Emma realized she wanted to hear that voice her whole life. It was somehow warm and mesmerizing. "Thank you so much. You're the only one who wanted to help me. I really appreciate it. But all I can do in return is walk you home," the guy said, seemingly embarrassed. Emma was happy to agree. She really liked the young man. And so they set off down the alley, getting acquainted along the way. To Emma's surprise, Jake, that was the name of her new acquaintance, turned out to be very well-read and interesting to talk to. They immediately switched to the informal you, and by the end of the walk to Emma's house, they were already chatting like old friends who had known each other for years. The whole time as they walked, he never told her why he ended up on the street, and the girl decided not to bring up a topic that he was avoiding. When they reached the gate of her house, Emma suggested he come inside. "I have a casserole and delicious mint tea. Would you like to come in?" she asked bashfully. But Jake very politely declined, answering, "I really love casserole, but I would feel awkward. Besides, I think you must be tired after work. But some other time I will definitely take you up on it." From then on, they met almost every day on their special bench, seemingly by chance. But really each was already waiting for those meetings. The locals who lived nearby and saw this strange couple every day just shook their heads disapprovingly. A slender and very tidy girl of modest height and an almost 6.5-foot guy who looked more like a homeless man made many give them astonished looks as they passed by. But they were happy together, and in those moments they didn't care in the slightest what others around them thought. Holding hands, they chatted merrily, and it seemed that in that world there was no one else for them but each other. One day, as this couple, so amazing to everyone, was passing by a trash can at the exit from the grove, they suddenly heard a faint whimpering sound. The young people stopped and listened in surprise, realizing that the sound was coming from a shoebox lying on the ground. When they opened the lid, they were met by the tear-filled eyes of a tiny black puppy. "Oh, you poor little thing, who threw you here?" said Emma, ready to start crying herself. "Come with us." They wrapped up the black pup, immediately dubbing him Buddy in the scarf given to the guy by Emma, and hurried home. This time, preoccupied with caring for their ward, they didn't even notice how they ended up at Emma's house. They spent whole evenings fussing over the poor pup, bathing him, feeding him, and happily watching him blissfully snoozing on the little bed Emma prepared. Then they would sit embracing on the sofa for a long time. That day, for the first time, Jake agreed to spend the night at the girls' place. Though they both made excuses about taking care of their charge, it was really just an excuse to not ever separate again. They already couldn't imagine life without each other. That night they barely slept, blissfully making plans for their whole life together, dreaming about how they would live in this house and raise the at least 3 kids they would have. When Jake talked about this, Emma just laughed. Where would they all fit here? But her beloved assured her with a serious expression that it would be his concern as the head of the family. Emma fell happily asleep on his shoulder towards morning, feeling like this man would never let her down or abandon her. They already couldn't imagine life without each other. In the morning, Jake greatly surprised Emma by proposing to her. Though instead of a ring, smiling, he slipped onto her finger a makeshift piece of jewelry twisted out of candy wrapper foil. At first, the girl was confused, but then she buried her face in his chest and whispered, "Of course I agree. After all, I fell in love with you right away." His status didn't bother her in the slightest. The main thing was that he would always be by her side. As she made breakfast for her beloved that morning, she chattered happily about how they didn't need a big flashy wedding since they had no money, and they should just sign the papers and celebrate that evening, just the 2 of them plus Buddy. She was ready for anything as long as she got to wake up and fall asleep next to her love every day. But Jake, kissing Emma on the cheek, said, "Don't worry about anything, my dear. Leave preparations for the celebration dinner to me." His enigmatic smile indicated that he clearly intended to surprise his bride. Emma wasn't surprised by anything. After all, even meeting him had been an amazing twist of fate. She thought Jake simply wanted to take care of dinner himself, and, playfully smiling, agreed. In the month before the wedding, all of Emma's acquaintances and colleagues tried to talk her out of it. They couldn't understand how she could agree to marry an ordinary street bum. They didn't just say all kinds of nasty things about him, but tried pouring as much filth on him as they could. But Emma let it all pass her by, responding to everyone with a happy smile. She didn't care in the slightest what others thought. The main thing was that he would always be by her side, and the girl had never been truly in love before. Emma couldn't hide her surprise when her groom arrived at the registry office in a nice car and looked completely transformed. He was cleanly shaven and wearing brand new clothes from head to toe. Everyone who came to the ceremony was literally dumbfounded, but this was only the beginning. After registering their marriage, Jake invited all those who came to congratulate them, friends and colleagues, to a celebration dinner at one of the nicest restaurants in town. Emma didn't know what to expect next. At the restaurant, beautifully set tables and a very charming host awaited them. At the height of the evening, her new husband approached the microphone and said, "Today I'm an insanely happy man because now I'm married to the kindest and most decent girl in the whole city. All this time, you all condemned her, tried to talk her out of marrying a bum. Only she was able to see the human being in me. After all, are money and externals more important than soul and heart?" It turned out he was a very wealthy businessman. His parents, who died in a car accident, had left him a company and a considerable fortune, and he, after graduating from the economics department at university, easily succeeded in managing his late father's business. Every day he would go to work in his car, and one day he noticed Emma as she was crossing the road right near that same grove. The girl seemed to him a fragile, divine creature, and he decided to meet her no matter what. But knowing that all girls were greedy for his wealth, he decided to check how she would react to a simple poor guy. Finding out at what time she usually walked home from work through the park, he decided to trick her a little, while also hoping to test her selflessness. All his past romances ended very quickly as soon as his girlfriend started pumping money out of him after learning of his fortune. This usually started right from the first dates and escalated over time. Some even managed to start hinting at some diamond ring or a seaside vacation after just a week. And so Jake decided that to avoid past mistakes, he would check if this girl he liked would relate to him as an ordinary person, or rather even an extraordinary one, very poor and needing help. And he wasn't wrong. He understood that his Emma was precisely the kind of person ready to stand by him, even in poverty. Right after the astounding wedding, Jake moved his wife and loyal buddy to his huge house. The girl easily took care of maintaining cleanliness and comfort and pampering her beloved with delicious treats. A year after the wedding, their gorgeous daughter was born, very much resembling her mommy. Jake doted on his princesses, trying to take care of them and fulfill their every wish. A couple of years later, many admired in the same grove the beautiful, friendly family with two toddlers cheerfully walking down the alley. The petite blonde mommy with the curly-haired baby girl and the tall, slender daddy with the boy who looked exactly like him gazed lovingly at each other, glowing with happiness and somehow transmitting that positive energy to all around them. Subscribe to our channel and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.